All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Perception Paradox. My name is Zivile and I'm your host. And today we are up for another weekly treat. And today's episode is a lot about Europe, entrepreneurship, capital. So I sit down with a partner at Nordic Science Capital and founder of Growth Minds, Vincent Weir, to talk about what it really takes to build a better Europe in 2026. And Vincent is the rare kind of operator who can hold big ideas like Renaissance 2.0, AI native institutions, a new type of university, and zoom all the way down to the weekly scorecard that creates traction. So we talk many different angles and topics, like super connecting as a real discipline, storytelling as a leverage, why commitment is super important nowadays, and how founders can build communities that last. So if you care about leadership, community, the Renaissance of Europe, this episode is for you, so let's dive in. Real people, real stories, and real challenges that break the status quo. I'm your host, Zivile, and welcome to Perception Paradox. Vincent Weir, welcome to Perception Paradox.
Thanks so much. Excited to be here.
I'm excited that you're here finally. You know, I remember the first time we met in person, I think we were already connected on LinkedIn. Was it in Latitude last year or something like that? It was quite recent. And what struck me the most, like you literally were like the super connector in the room, knowing everyone's name, remembering the faces the next day. And I don't know, all those, green check marks for super connector, basically. So can we start from the beginning? When did that superpower came into your life, and when did you realize that you are actually damn good at this?
Well, my grandmother's great at it, and I was reading her biography last night. It's something she wrote up at the request of our family, and it turns out her dad was great at it too. And I don't know how far back that goes, but it's certainly something I've gotten to the privilege of observing in my family. And I think, I don't know if Americans are forced to learn these kind of skills in a very competitive social culture, but I always grew up hearing things like the best way to be interesting is to be interested. And I think that's a really true aphorism in this case. So if you're able to learn about people and hopefully remember their name. I think that is maybe one of the super connector skill sets, is to be able to remember things and people. But if you can do that and then you see somebody and you're able to be like, oh, hey, Zivi, come talk about your podcast with Marius over here. And, you're both from Lithuania, making these kind of connections. It does bring energy and life to a room. And I get so much of a joy from that it's a self-fueling flywheel in that sense.
Yeah. How do you remember all the names? What do you do? Do you try to add some kind of familiar definitions for the name? Or because you also go to so many events, we meet so many people, right? So you need to have some kind of a structure.
I did learn a fun trick from an Argentine sales guy that I worked with in the US. He said that if you ever forget somebody's name, you don't ever say buddy or hey man, you say, hey, how are the guys doing? And they tell you who their guys are, and you sort of work in the math of who they are. Can't say I've ever used that, but sometimes I will wait, because the most important word in the English language we say is the person's name, right? So they really want to hear their name in the conversation. And if I can't remember what it is in the first 20 seconds, I'll keep trying, running the algorithm of who is this person. And usually after a few minutes, I can get it. It's very often that I'll start a conversation at some of these tech conferences without knowing who the person is, but I give it a few minutes and then I can think about it. And of course, trying to piece the puzzle together. So often I will remember one thing about a person, but I won't remember the name. And so then I'm like processing, showing them that I remember who they are, like giving those signals of authenticity. That, by the way, is really important in an online sales context as well. People want to know that you're talking to them. I find, when I'm doing like mass outreach for whatever it is, recruiting for some startup program or talking to even in a sales context, if there's even just a shred of personalization that feels real, the person is more likely to respond. And if there isn't, then it just feels generic. And so that's another learning for me of if I can bring a detail like your podcast, for example, or where we met the first time, that's helpful and it makes people feel comfortable.
100% really great tips of wisdom how to connect and how to make people comfortable, because that's what it is, all about the events and communities and networks. What made you confident? I am comfortable as well in front of the audiences, so in front of the social circles, besides that you grew up in America. I saw that you were also an athlete and you broke some records, so that shows already resilience, dedication, discipline, hard work. What were the things in your life that brought you to where you are today?
Yeah, I've always loved being on a stage. And I think that is something that doesn't come naturally to a lot of people, but can be learned. And one of the things that I've picked up from my childhood was parents that were constantly celebrating performances. And in America, it's sports is this incredible institution where you're constantly exposed to these stories about athletes and how hard they worked and, you know, the challenges that they overcame. And there's a whole beautiful visual, audio, industrial complex of telling those stories. And, you know, it's really elegant to watch. We just had the Super Bowl in the US, like to watch these teams play. It's like ballet mixed with great soundtrack music, mixed with pop stars, and there's this incredible institution of storytelling around hard work. And I think that is definitely true in my family. Both my parents were great athletes. Both my parents worked really hard. On my mom to raise 6 kids and my dad to build a business, multiple businesses during my childhood. So I've loved, I guess that's a huge part of the influence that I have in my life. And I would say that, you know, as far as comfort on stage, like some people think that it's natural to get up there and perform well. At least in my case, I'm spending hours and hours and hours of practice anytime before I go up on stage, for the most part, especially in some of these scripted conference type settings, like literally at least 10 hours of prep time for a speech or moderating a panel or something like this. And that I think comes across as natural because you've rehearsed so many times.
You rehearse, and then you're familiar with the content. You're familiar with what can happen, which direction it can be taken. You have that knowledge that will guide you through. Amazing. And you already mentioned yourself, Vincent, storytelling, right? So we're getting closer to your big mission in Europe. And you've mentioned, right, somewhere that storytelling is your greatest professional skill and asset that can bring you miles ahead. And we have sometimes some hypothesis that in Europe, we are quite bad at capturing this imagination and telling our stories. In some parts of European markets, we like to be humble, to stay quiet. So how is it really from your lens of perspective?
I think about Europe with multi-thousand-year lens, because I grew up in a school in the US that valorized especially the classical period of European culture. And I spent my entire elementary, middle, and high school studying Greek and Latin. And those are the languages I learned, which unfortunately didn't teach me how to communicate in other languages, and still something I'm struggling with. But it was a great perspective in the sense that you realize, you know, great nations rise and fall and rise again. And this is actually exactly the case with Europe. And so if you go all the way back to basically the birth of Western civilization, Europe was, you know, it was a minor kind of irrelevant portion of human history. It was not the birth of humanity. It's not where the great, you know, first empires were formed, but it did have this incredible moment with the ancient Greeks essentially inventing a simple alphabet that allowed all the people in the society, or certainly back then it was the property owning males, but theoretically anybody could learn the alphabet. And that was such an incredible breakthrough that Europe, I mean, and especially these Greek city-states, were able to contribute to the world. Because until that time, language was effectively the discipline of these specialists. And I call them hieroglyphic specialists, because of course there was the Egyptians over across the Mediterranean that had, you know, thousands and thousands of characters. And to be a scribe, to be somebody that wrote language, you had to dedicate your life to the practice. So it's a little bit like scientists today, right? You had to get a PhD in these symbols, and you had to get access to all this expensive equipment like the chisels and the stones. And the Greeks figured out how to bring that to everybody. And I think, you know, talk about storytelling, we are still telling the stories from that time period, the Odyssey, because they've been brought to us with the first ever written books. And this is an incredible gift that Europe has given to the world. And now, most cultures have these simplified alphabets. In the Greek case, it was 24 letters. In English, we have 26 letters. But this idea of like a vowel and a consonant that together you can form any word and that you don't need like one word per concept, that was a huge invention back then. And that was the birth of Western civilization. And that created a lot of the institutions that we still have in Europe, from democracy to universities. And unfortunately, that civilization didn't last very long, right? It died. It certainly, fell to the Romans, and then the Romans kind of sputtered out, and then there was this 1,000-year dark age. And sure enough, Europe had to come back and do it again. And that's what we did during the Renaissance, where more or less the printing press was the general purpose technology of its time, similar to how the alphabet was the general purpose technology of the Greek period. And the Renaissance Italians, they're from the ruins of the Roman Empire. Talk about rise and fall and then rise again. And they basically got in touch with this incredible past that they had. It was a lot of these book hunters, I think they were called. They were chasing books all over Europe, in the German monasteries, in the Swiss monasteries, in the Italian monasteries, finding these classics and reminding themselves of what their great culture had achieved. Because when they looked around them, they saw complacency, they saw decay, they saw people that weren't celebrating greatness. And they said, you know what, let's reach for this again and let's celebrate genius. Let's bring back some of the ruins that are all around us. And this is the culture that Leonardo da Vinci and so many other of the great Renaissance men were born into. And they were able to use this new technology of printed books. Leonardo, first generation ever in human history to have printed books in his hand. They were able to learn so much more. They had access to so much more knowledge. And from that knowledge, they were able to do things like make fundamental contributions in lots of different fields: art, medicine, science, defense technology, engineering, so many areas, right? Because they had access to this broad knowledge that used to be, one person's profession for their entire life. And so when I think about those two periods, it obviously reminds me of today, where we have a chance with AI and with perhaps even, the internet as a kind of knowledge increasing technology to lean into, a rebirth of our civilization, or maybe a third birth. And it doesn't matter what's happened before, right? I mean, we don't really know what was happening in pre-archaic Greece. We don't really know what was happening in the sort of period right before the Italian Renaissance. But we remember that period and the heroes that rose out of it because, to a large extent, they were empowered by this new technology. And I see a huge opportunity in Europe today to rebuild some of the institutions that we have, to lean into some of these transformational technology waves that, weren't invented here. But guess what? The printing press wasn't invented in Italy, right? We don't need to be the home of the place where the new technology comes. We just need to be quick to adopt it and build great institutions, the way the Italians built modern banks, the way that they built the modern university ecosystem, the way they built scientific societies. We have a chance to do all of that and more in today's Europe. And I get so excited about that. And I think this is actually an amazing place. It's a place that's done it before.
So I can see and I can feel, I guess, together with the audience, the excitement. So where is that coming from? Like, you just show up in Europe and was like, let's make a better Europe. Or what inspired you? What kind of patterns have you noticed? And how did you find your place in this space?
Yeah, I think a lot of Europeans that immigrated to America share this idea of nation building or of like civilization building. I mean, that was the whole idea, right? You would move over to this, quote unquote, empty territory. Of course, there were lots of Native Americans there, but it was more or less billed to the Europeans that moved as like the land of opportunity, this big uninhabited space where you could go and build civilization from scratch. And so my family moved to the US a long time ago. When I'm in the US nowadays, it does feel significantly more competitive. It feels more crowded. It feels, to be honest, a lot like England must have felt to the early pilgrims that moved to America. And, England of those days was a kind of a hostile place if you were a creative free thinker. The whole idea of the early pilgrims was they wanted some kind of freedom from the religious oppression they were feeling. And they wanted this chance to kind of remake their life. And even though, I come from an amazing family and I have incredible support, and so many of my 5 other siblings have leaned into the support of our parents' network, I've seen an opportunity to do what basically my ancestors did and come back to Europe, which by comparison feels much more open and much more free and much more opportunity to build something from scratch. And that is exactly the opportunity that I've seized on here. I don't just think that it's that this is an opportunity because of the sort of technology that defines us. I think this is just an opportunity for, I think I'm particularly interested in these kind of challenges in my life.
And that's amazing. And what kind of one European trait we should stop apologizing for? Do you think,
What European
as
trait?
founders?
Well, yeah. It's interesting that you say there is a European trait. Like, I think what makes Europe such an amazing place is the fact that there are so many competing traditions and institutions, and to some extent, worldviews. Because yes, we have some shared values. Certainly one that comes top of mind right now is this idea of like national sovereignty. This is the reason why we're infuriated with both the Russia-Ukraine conflict and any kind of Greenland acquisition by the US. There's plenty of other values that we can share at a high level, but at the end of the day, it's a very diverse set of languages and traditions. I do think that what makes Europe functional is when we can lean into things that connect us across those cultures. And we've had lingua francas for a long time. Latin was the language that connected certainly the educated people from antiquity. Then you had French for a little bit. So, 3% of War and Peace is written in French. Today it's English. I do think to some extent, if we can standardize around a lingua franca, which Europe does an amazing job of educating its people. And, I'm a big fan of this push to make European a language, which would be English, but spoken with whatever local accent you have. I think network effects are real. English has won the internet in the sense that it's where a lot of the content's being created. It's increasingly where knowledge will be created now that AI is able to harvest the data of written text. And a lot of the best output will be trained on English language models. And I think it's probably part of Sweden's success that it's kind of inherently international, and English is a big part of the culture here. So I do think that that's actually an advantage that Europe has had for a long time. And I would encourage us leaning more into that.
All right, let's do that. And Vincent, growth minds. I can see that written on your beautiful jumper on the left side. And that's where I also joined a couple of different events organized by you. So where are you right now with your Growth Minds community, and what's your big vision for 2026? I know that it might sound like a bit vague, but I think it's nice to dream big and to have this North Star where you're going, right?
Yeah, Growth Minds is a community of startup and scale-up leaders, and our mission is to help leaders tap into the deep sources of emotional, mental, and spiritual energy that they often neglect in a fast-paced world of startups. I think a lot of us know that physical energy is very important. This is things like diet, exercise, sleep. People have rituals for this. They have like their bed routine. They have, don't drink alcohol in January. They have, the sort of habits of waking up and doing yoga or whatever. And I think we do neglect more often than not those other areas of mental, spiritual, and emotional energy. And so in order to be a leader, I think leadership is about engulfing an organization with energy, bringing incredible amounts of creative power to bear on the world, obviously through others as a key part of that. But in order to inspire others, you also need to be full of that energy yourself. You need to spend big in order to make waves. And in order to spend, you need to recover. What we've built is a community for founders to recover energy on a monthly basis. It's a ritual. Same with your ritual of sleep or working out each day. We've built rituals for recovering mental, spiritual, and emotional energy. And this is meditation exercises of focusing on what has been giving me energy lately, what's been taking away energy, and how can I work through the issues where the energy is being bottled up inside. It's a community group. It's founders that come together to support one another in their biggest moments of need and opportunity. And I think at the end of the day, it's also an incredible, it's a network. It's this kind of scarce resource of really valuable people whose time is a flywheel on one another's time. It is this incredible investment of time and energy that pays back in big ways. Yeah, our vision for 2026 is to expand across Europe. We're already in Copenhagen and Stockholm, and we want to add more European cities this year en route to effectively replacing the role of the MBA in society for people that love what they do. I know that many of my friends in the US have gone to these MBA schools. They're super expensive. They put you in basically a party for 2 years or maybe 1 year. And what do you get out of it? You get a network, you get some degree of status or credential that you can carry with you. You get a break from the work. And of course, you get an education, right? But the education is almost like the fourth thing because frankly, most people I talk to about business school, they either know what they're talking about or it's not the main purpose of their time there. At Growth Minds, we're doing all four of those things as well, but it's for people that are in the job. And it's something that doesn't just take 2 years and then you're out. It's like building these constant, deep relationships with a peer group of 8 to 10 leaders. And of course, establishing these international connections. And of course, having that sense of identity with the tribe. I'm part of this group of great people that can help me in my career, that can invest, that can join my companies. That's what we're building. And I'm super grateful for all the wonderful people that have come through the program at this point. We've had over 100 CEOs that are currently in Growth Minds, and
wow,
and we're growing significantly year over year.
So when you start growing, and let's say you join Growth Minds or any other, let's say, networks to get value, how do you keep the relationships? I mean, of course, now we're so internationally, and there are different ways to do that, to maintain a healthy relationship. What would be your maybe ABC or unapologetic rules that you try to apply daily to have a healthy network?
Well, for me, it's about consistency. And I like this word ritual a lot because for me, rituals are, you don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about them or planning them. They're just kind of, they naturally fit into your life because you've made a decision once and then you've implemented a system that makes that very repeatable. So my ritual with building great relationships with the founders that I know through Growth Minds is we commit to meet once a month. And every time that we finish meeting, we just plan the next one in advance. It's part of the meeting itself to just make sure that we've got another time together. And I think that consistency, that is so important. That commitment to each other, for me, is the key to carrying heavier burdens and experiencing deeper joys together. Committed relationships, I mean, this is not rocket science. This is how, almost every human civilization has some kind of marriage tradition. That's at the core of what marriage is committing to somebody else to go through the riches and poor together. And we're just leaning into that idea, which in Sweden is maybe in decline a little bit, I think to the detriment of relationships in Sweden. And we're reactivating that somewhat conservative idea that commitment to a city, commitment to a profession, commitment to a group of people, commitment to a set of ideas and values. These are really important ways to live life to the fullest. And so we embody that idea, which I would recommend across different types of relationships and, there's different types of commitments, but I would really emphasize that particular word when it comes to connecting deeply with people.
Commitment. And I think commitment starts also within ourselves, right? How do we show up every day and how do we commit on a good and a bad day to our goals and our visions and our best life we want to live, basically? If we fail that, then commitment to ourselves also fails in a way.
Yeah, so, but I want to push back on that a little bit because I think individualism is the opposite of commitment, right? So individualism is what Sweden's really, really, really good at. And this says, hey, you are the center, you do you make sure that you can perform at your best. And commitment's like, hey, I am valuable to others and I get my value in basically part of the value of my life is created in relationship to others and not in relation just to myself. So I think society is constantly swinging back and forth between individualism or autonomy or the desire to separate from our parents and this connectedness or attachment or commitment to others, right? These are the two different extreme ends of the spectrum. And Kant said that every person has in them that tension. And so societies like Sweden have swung really far away from commitment toward individualism. And basically with Growth Minds, we're trying to steer a little bit the culture back toward, hey, there is real value in committing and in being there with other people in all the moments, even when they're not the hottest startup in the world and everything's going great and everybody wants their selfie taken with the person. We're there and the value comes from being there in exactly that moment, in riches and in poor, in sickness and in health, this kind of thing, right?
100%. Well, that's something we can elaborate more in our next catch-up. I think that's a very great take you brought. But I have one more question before we wrap it up. So upcoming years, right? You've been mentioning about the Renaissance 2.0 and doing the Growth Minds. You find yourself in different events. So basically, how do you want maybe to, as a close-up message for that Renaissance 2.0, show up in Europe and contribute to that and...
Yeah, well, my day job is Nordic Science Capital, where I'm a general partner, founder, and chairman. And there, our goal is to back the early stage life science projects coming out of European universities that have a chance to save lives. And I would say that my goal for Nordic Science Capital is to be part of a movement that should be pan-European, to connect scientific institutions, private companies, governments. We need to rethink how we do science largely for the age of AI. And this will require a concerted effort from tons of different sources. This is not just the government that's spending money on universities to adopt AI. I think that we need a new type of university. We need an AI native scientific institution in the way that the Renaissance gave birth to a totally new type of university that we still have with us today. And that the Greek, the Renaissance or first birth of Western civilization created, the first universities, right? We need something that's native to this new technology stack that we have now. And I would love to be part of building that with other folks that are interested in robotics and AI and basically thinking about new ways of creating knowledge with these new superpowers that we have.
Okay. That's very direct, very sharp, and very ambitious. And I love hearing that ambitions from you here, what you want to do in Europe. And I can't wait to follow your progress. And Vincent, in the podcast, we have a small tradition to leave the listeners with a thought to ponder. So today we covered different angles of your growth, career, the projects and work you're doing. What would be your final thought to the audience?
Something I've been thinking about a lot lately is taking a really big ambition, and many have them. I was talking to a guy the other day who wants to make a new web browser. And we have so many opportunities given to us in the age of AI, but I think there's a great art to breaking that down into concrete, tangible next steps. And it's a kind of very careful mission. One of the ways that I've heard this framed recently is that there's a difference between vision and traction. And so vision is the inspirational goal, and traction is basically taking that all the way from like a 10-year vision. What do I want to dedicate my life to? Can I make that come to life in a way that I can hold myself accountable for every single week, where I'm basically responsible for delivering metrics against a scorecard every single week? And that exercise is so profound and powerful. I just led 20 CEOs or 15 CEOs going through this exercise in Spain a couple of weeks ago. It is an extremely powerful exercise to connect a vision to traction on a daily or weekly basis. And I think it's a skill that I have not seen very much in Europe. I see it much more in the US. And I think that's something that a lot of European leaders and founders can master, is the zooming down to the weekly scorecard.
All right, Vincent, thank you so much. We will leave in the show notes how people can reach out to you and learn more. And if they're interested in joining Growth Minds and learning more about your big mission in the European, I would say, educational and venture ecosystem, and also founders, thank you so much for finding time today, joining Perception Paradox, bringing the light, the great stories as always, and energy. And yeah, I hope everyone who listened today enjoyed, connect with Vincent, and check out his great work. And yeah, I hope you learned a lot. Thank you.
Thanks so much. All right.